Oh, hi there. Welcome to this video, which is going to be called something like Escaping the Matrix or moving from projection to presence, which is really the same thing. Like ultimately what we're going to talk about is the idea inspired in many ways by Carl Jung's philosophy and also Plato's cave that perception is projection. What we see out there in the world is quite a lot of the time projection of our own hidden stuff. And this is especially relevant if we're stuck or we're blocked or we're not happy with life or we keep getting triggered or activated by things in general. If that is the case, then there is some projection going on. Another way to describe projection, which I find quite good, is that it takes one to know one. And so if you see something in somebody else, especially if they're annoying you, then probably what you're actually seeing is something hidden or disowned that's actually within you. And if we want to find freedom and escape the matrix, then there's two things that we need to do. One, learn to drop the projection. And two, realign ourselves with presence, because in the present moment, we're aligned with the natural drive towards wholeness. And that's ultimately what we need to align ourselves with if we want to feel real, if we want to process what's going on inside ourselves, if we want to move towards our real goals and our vision and all that stuff. So drop the projection, align yourself with wholeness. That's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to give you like 4 steps that you can walk yourself through in order to do that, basically. So let's get onto it. Here we go. Boom. So just in case you don't know, what is projection? Projection was popularized by Carl Jung. He's the one who coined the term, I do believe. But people have been talking about it forever because it's just a phenomenon. It's part of the human experience. Basically, what it refers to is the idea that we have certain disowned parts of ourselves that we send into the shadow self. We hide them behind the ego, and so that we don't have to face them, we project them out into the world. This allows us to ultimately keep some distance between us and whatever it is without actually having to do anything with it. And so we can just keep the ego, the identity that we've created, because of our shame, guilt, and trauma and all the stuff from the past, we can keep the ego in the same place. And that gives us a sense of security. But actually, in the long term, it screws up our relationship with ourselves, the world, and reality, because reality keeps changing around us because it's constantly flowing. Everything is moving towards wholeness. And the ego is just a little conceptual box that we put ourselves in. And so projection ultimately is the thing that shows us we need to make some changes. We need to let go of some stuff. We need to integrate some emotional stuff. We need to release certain emotions. And if we are living in a very reactive way, if we get wound up all the time, if we're not happy, if we feel stuck, then we can assume, and we should assume, that there is some projection going on. The reason I say we should assume is because if we do, it gives us power over whatever is going on inside us. Not everything is 100% projection. So like if I come across a person who is actually annoying, they may actually just be annoying. I might just be observing it, and I don't have any of those hidden qualities within myself. But if I assume that those hidden qualities are there, then it will allow me to grow by raising awareness of what's actually going on inside me. And so if you do feel stuck and you are reactive and all that kind of thing, I would recommend always assuming that there's some projection, because then you're going to be able to dive inside yourself and start to reverse engineer your relationship with yourself. We know that projection is a real thing, a real phenomenon, because different people can react to the exact same trigger in totally different ways. So for example, one person can look at a rose and they see the beautiful petals and they get all excited about the flower and how resplendently beautiful it is and all that kind of stuff. Another person can look at a rose and they just focus on the thorns. They think about all the pain in the world. They think about like how dangerous it is. They think about all the dark side of the rose, basically. It's the same rose, the same trigger, but it activates different things in different people. That's how we know projection is real, because ultimately, even though the trigger is the same, it activated something totally different in each of these hypothetical individuals because of what's already inside them. And that's the point. If you keep experiencing emotions because of all these things going on out in the world around you, then it's not the world. That is an illusion. That's the projection. The thing that is causing the problems is what's already in you. And so if you can drop that projection you can actually start to deal with this stuff, and then you can live the life you want to live. So that is that, but let's go on to the rest of this video. So the short version of all this is that if you're disconnected from who you really are, you become fragmented within yourself, then that fragmentation is going to show you a fragmented world. The world, as you experience it, is always going to feel like there's a bit of a gap between you and things that you're experiencing. And it's not because of the way the world is, it's because of the way you are. Somebody once said, we don't see the world as it is, but as we are. That's just another way of talking about projection. Perception is projection. So what we see is just a projection of ourselves. And if you understand this, then it makes it so much easier to free yourself from a lot of the threats and annoyances and little niggly things that we experience in life, because we can actually start to own them. And the way that we own them is by dropping the projection so that we can return towards the natural flow towards wholeness, which is where we belong, where real life is experienced. And then we can keep moving and evolving with life instead of against it, because we're creating this illusory barrier between ourselves and everything else. And so if you drop the projection, you drop the barrier, and you can start moving and flowing in a much more wholesome and wonderful way. So just to make it clear, the opposite of projection is just presence. When we're present, we're not in this little box, the ego, that we filter everything through. We're just in life. We're allowing the things inside of ourselves, like our emotions and our thoughts, to just go where they need to go, which means they can process. Emotions are energy in motion. We can allow the outside world to not be a complete threat, because we're not projecting this fragmentation out there. It's something that we can use as a springboard to get where it is that we need to go, which is a deeper connection to wholeness. And ultimately, if we can keep choosing presence, then we can get out of our heads. We can allow our body to do what it needs to do, because we're not holding the tension and the stress in there by locking it behind the ego and stopping things moving where they need to move. We can just be present. There's a quote by Lao Tzu, or it's always attributed to Lao Tzu. He says, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. If you're feeling good, you're feeling real. He didn't say it like that. You're just in the present. And that's because in the present, you're not carrying the weight of the past with you, and you're not looking forward and shitting your pants because you're perceiving all kinds of threats, because you've disconnected yourself from yourself. You're just real, and you're moving with life, and you're flowing with life, and then you can be responsive instead of just reacting. That's the problem with projection. It causes you to react. And all reaction is just a product of your old conditioning, and your old conditioning is the thing that keeps you locked in the ego. And if you're projecting your ego out into the world, onto life, then you'll always be in the matrix, because you're not going to be present enough to actually be free to flow with real life. So that's why it's so important to know all this. So let's get on to the practical stuff and try and make this a shortish video. So I've explained what projection is. I've explained that the opposite is presence, ultimately, and that if we can get in the present moment, we can align ourselves internally and externally with the natural drive towards wholeness. So how do you drop the projection? Well, it comes back to this thing that I already said, which is that projection exists because we don't want to own the feelings that are already inside of us. It might be shame, it might be guilt, it might be fear, it might be trauma, it could literally be anything, positive or negative, actually. I just listed a bunch of negative feelings, but it could be our joy, it could be love, it could be whatever, right? So all these things get disowned, sent into the shadow territory, and we don't want to accept that they're there, which means we don't want to accept ourselves, and so we project them onto other people. The way that we drop the projection is by dropping the story about whatever has activated those feelings within us. So in the example I gave earlier about the rose, the person who sees the rose and tells themselves a story about, oh my God, I don't want to touch this rose because, you know, it's got thorns, I'm going to cut my fingers, and so much pain and horror in the world. They already have feelings of existential dread and horror within them, which is why they're telling themselves that story. But when we focus on the story instead of the feeling, then all we end up doing is just rearranging the furniture on the Titanic while it still sinks. We're just rearranging all these little concepts and beliefs and ideas that are an extension of our ego, because the ego is ultimately just an interpretation of reality that we filter everything through. and not the real thing. And so if we step back from that interpretation and allow ourselves to get into reality, then we can just feel whatever it is that we're feeling. And then purely by doing that, we can stop blocking it with these conceptual stories and interpretations, and it will just do what it needs to do. This is the crazy thing about our feelings. As I always end up quoting, emotions are energy in motion, emotion. And all we need to do is let them move, allow the motion to do what it needs to do, because like I keep saying, there's a natural drive towards wholeness. The way that we allow it to do that is by just welcoming it instead of resisting it. What you resist persists. And so if you focus on these stories, these interpretations, which are really just an extension of the ego so that all the shadow stuff can stay hidden, then you're resisting. Projection is resistance. And so if you resist it and you don't feel it, then it's just going to build up. You're going to get more and more tension, more and more stress, more and more problems. If you drop the story and you focus on the sensations of the feeling, you allow yourself to feel safe instead of feeling that the feeling is a threat, then it's going to naturally start dissolving. It's going to naturally start moving. And so ultimately, all of this comes down to learning to tell the difference between the interpretation and reality. People love walking around thinking that their interpretations are reality itself. Interpretations are always conceptual. So whatever story you're telling yourself about whatever is activated, whatever is going on inside of you, then that is not the real thing. The real thing that you can actually deal with is the sensations in your body. It's the actual emotive side of whatever you're dealing with. And if you take the story away and you focus on that, that's when you can start moving forward. So I'm going to give you 4 steps to do that. You can do this with any negative emotions that pop up. And if you do it, then ultimately you're just going to drop the projection, become present, and then move forward in the way that you were made and designed to do. So what are these magical 4 steps? I'm going to go over them in a bit more detail, but the first one is to slow down. When you slow down, you allow your nervous system to stop perceiving these feelings as threats and to realize that it's actually okay to feel it. A big part of the problem is that we can't tell the difference between physical danger, like a poisonous spider or something, and just emotional discomfort. So the first step is slow down. We'll go over that again in a second. The second step is to allow yourself to feel the sensations and to just not run away from it, basically. So instead of resisting, to feel it. The third step is to zoom out. You want to get some real perspective. A lot of the time, because we're in the projection and we've got this little story that the ego created, we wrap that around all the sensations and our experience of those sensations, and then the stories we tell ourselves about the experience of those sensations, and we don't actually feel it. And so if we zoom out and we come at it from a higher perspective, let's say, of realness and acceptance and even unconditional love, if you want to go there, then what happens is we can see that we're limiting ourselves with the interpretation, and we can give ourselves the security that we need to be able to feel it away from these interpretations. And then the fourth thing is to maintain this higher perspective of our realness, but to see what kind of message or intuitive prompt there is about moving forward with whatever situation. If we can come from that place, then we're no longer locked in the ego and the little me and all of the reactivity and the conditioning and everything. We're just coming from a place of wholeness, and we're allowing ourselves to get answers from that place that's always inside us, and that we're actually always in touch with, but we just blind ourselves to because of these interpretations and all of the bullshit that comes with it. So even though I just gave you an overview, I'm just going to give you a bit more detail about each of these steps. If you want, then write this down, because you can do this next time you notice that you are having some hamster wheel thoughts, or you've got some emotions popping up that you think are coming from someone else. Like if you're blaming them or whatever it is, you're blaming some situation, drop the projection, realize it's already in you, and then allow it to just go where it needs to go. So the first step, anyway, is just to slow down. Slowing down basically means that you allow yourself to get to a point where you're not in the sympathetic nervous system and you're in fight or flight mode, but you're relaxed, even though you're feeling something or you perceive something that is not very pleasant. Slowing down simply just means that you literally slow down. You slow down your breath. Maybe you do some 4-7-8 breathing or 4 before breathing for like a couple of rounds. Ultimately, what you want to do in the first step of slowing down is get yourself to that place where you feel safe. Like, remind yourself that it is safe to feel that feeling. One of the reasons that we project is because our nervous system is seeing whatever it is that we're feeling as a threat. And so instead of dealing with it, it sends it out there. But it's not an actual threat. It's just emotionally uncomfortable because your ego is founded on not feeling those emotions. And if you do feel them, you're actually going to widen your experience of yourself. You're going to expand a little bit, so to speak. And your ego is going to have to reconfigure. And the ego doesn't want to reconfigure because it believes at some level that it just needs to stay the same because it originally came about to make you feel safe, ironically. And so if you can make yourself slow down and feel safe, look around you, feel grounded, all that stuff, then you're basically getting your nervous system ready to deal with the feeling and not the story that is created to avoid that feeling. The second thing that you want to do is, once you've created that feeling of safety, or you've tuned into it, you need to keep breathing into the feeling, whatever it is. But before you start feeling it, you need to remind yourself to drop the story that you've attached to it. So maybe someone's made you angry because they cut you off in traffic or something, and now you've got home and you're reflecting on this, and you close your eyes. The initial story is, right, this guy who cut me off is such a bad driver, blah, 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 blah. They made me feel angry. That's ultimately what you're saying. You're putting the blame onto them. You need to drop that story completely because this is projection that we're assuming we're dealing with. And so the anger was already there. And so what you want to do is drop the story and tap into that anger that is there already. This means that you're just going to feel it. You're going to keep breathing slowly, so you maintain that parasympathetic state. But you're going to breathe into it. You're going to let it take up as much space as it needs to take. You're going to see where it shows up in your body. Maybe you feel it in your stomach. Maybe you got tightness in your chest. Whatever it is, just feel it and be with it and remind yourself that it's okay to feel it. And because what we're doing, we're stepping away from the interpretation that you've created about why you're feeling this feeling, which is the projection, and you're just going that next level to embracing what was already there that made you come up with those interpretations in the first place. Many of our thoughts are just caused by our emotional stuff. And interpretations basically are just a bunch of different thoughts. And so if you go to the source, which is feeling what's there, then you can get into that emotions are emotion, energy, emotion place, and allow it to start doing what it needs to do. But you need to feel safe to do that. Otherwise, you're going to see it as a threat and you're going to try and run away. Once you've done this, once you've created safety and you've dropped the projection or the story, then you can actually just be present with it. And when you start to be present with it, that's when the emotion is going to move on, and you can just allow it to do that because you're not clinging or resisting or causing distortion and blocks with the interpretation. So step away from the interpretation, feel it, don't fear it, and allow it to do what it needs to do. Once you've started to really feel it, what you want to do, you want to zoom out. So the interpretation and the resistance to feeling it ultimately has been caused by the ego, the little version of you. You want to zoom out beyond that ego to a higher version of yourself, or whatever word you want to use, to your realness, to the version of you that is connected to wholeness and truth and acceptance, basically. Unconditional acceptance and love for yourself. So we're not judging the ego, the little version that's created all these interpretations. We're just zooming out and seeing it from a wider perspective. When you do that, you're going to get a greater understanding of the situation itself and the feelings that you are feeling, because you're just going to see them in this way that I keep talking about, as something that's just moving. And you'll see that the ego version and all the interpretations and the projection that you create because of that, it's not the truth. Because here in the truth, when we get that wider perspective, there is actually nothing really to worry about, because we can just let go and we can allow it to move. So zoom out to the highest version of yourself that you can tap into, whatever that means to you. Like, it might not even be a version of yourself. Some people might come at this from the perspective of God or Jesus or truth or whatever works for you, but something higher than just this little earthly version of yourself that you've created as a response to all of your underlying shame, guilt, and trauma. When you do that, you're going to get a greater understanding, basically. You're going to see it in a way where you realize it doesn't have to affect you to the extent that it has been. And the only reason it was affecting you is because you were clinging to it by resisting it, paradoxically. So by not wanting to feel it, we kept it where it was. By seeing it in the light of truth, we can allow ourselves to feel it or keep feeling it, and then it's going to move on. The fourth thing you want to do is when you spend some time in this higher perspective, you basically want to ask this version of yourself that you tapped into, which is the real you, the most present version of yourself. You want to ask it if it has anything to say to this lower version of yourself, to the ego version of yourself that is struggling with the projection. Normally, it's going to say something like, there's nothing to worry about, or stop listening to such nonsense, or just ignore it, or you are worthy, or you are great, or whatever it is, right? It's going to tell you something that is going to remind you who you are and that there's nothing to worry about. Because when you're real, you truly do accept yourself. And that means you can accept these feelings, which is going to allow them to pass, and you can stop buying into the projection, which is actually the opposite of an acceptance of yourself. It's the denial of yourself, because it only exists because you've only disowned all these parts of yourself. So there were some pretty terrible examples of what this higher version of you might say. But ultimately, tap into it, experience that higher feeling of wholeness, zoomed out, away from all these interpretations and projections and blah, blah, blah. And just ask yourself what you need to know, basically. Ask yourself what you need to know. You'll always have the answer. Remember it, and then act on it moving forward. Because once that emotion is dissolved and is gone, and the projection has been dropped, and you're aligned with that natural drive towards wholeness, you're going to be able to start taking inspired action, because you're no longer going to be blocking yourself with all of your old conditioning and the stuff that keeps you in the matrix. So that was a 4-step process. Slow down, feel the feeling, zoom out, and then get the message from that higher place, and then act on it when you're ready. If you can do this, you're going to realize that so many of the problems in our lives are just projections of the stuff that we've disowned. Ultimately, the way forward is always to feel whatever we're feeling, not in a victim-y way. We don't want to become enmeshed and attached to our feelings. We just want to observe them so they can pass. If you can do that, then you're going to align yourself with the natural drive towards wholeness, which is just a drive that's within all of us to go deeper and deeper and deeper into connection to our real selves, the connection to the world, and the connection to reality. And the thing that allows us to do that is acceptance. If we don't accept ourselves, we get the projection. If we don't accept the world, then we end up creating drama and tension, which is just an extension of the disconnection that's within ourselves because we didn't accept ourselves. If we don't accept life, reality, then we're just going to keep running into problems. Because if you don't accept life, you don't accept the truth, you don't accept reality, then everything you do is just destined to failure, because the only place you can get results is in reality. And the thing that stops us from that is anything that stops us being present, which is why it's so important to drop the projection so we can become present and we can live a real life. So that was a video about moving from projection to presence. Ultimately, it all comes down to acceptance. If you don't accept yourself, then you will end up projecting, because the projection is always a reflection of the parts of ourselves that we haven't accepted yet. And that is just going to cause all kinds of problems. So hopefully that 4-step process helped you. You can walk yourself through it. If you want me to walk you through it, you can book a call on my website, ollyanderson.co.uk/talk. Most people that get in touch with me, I can end up helping them. So if you feel like this video has helped you and you want to go deeper, then do that. Book a call. It's a free call initially. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Stay real out there. Stay present. And don't let those projections hold you back. Drop them and keep flowing. Something like that. Peace.